Pellegrini, who's the Henry N. Harkins Professor and Chair from the University of Washington in Seattle, of course. He's going to be giving us his impressions and opinions about fulfilling some of the wonderful promises we've heard about simulation training throughout this meeting and also today with these incredible platforms and a lot of thought that's gone into it. But we've also heard from Dr. Beisky about some of the issues, and it's not so easy to get these into people's hands and to use them in the real world. And Dr. Pellegrini is going to summarize some of his ideas about some of the obstacles about fulfilling some of these wonderful promises.
Madam Chair, Dr. Grantcharov, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. The challenge that I have is to discuss what's on that title. My disclosures are here. In your booklet, you have an additional disclosure. I will not be talking about any of these companies or their products, but I will be referring to the relationship between industry and funding, and in that sense, I may have some bias there that you may want to know. Dr. Feldman asked me to talk about these two topics. One is an overall view of the promises of simulation training. The other one is the obstacles to its fulfillment. And I thought I would add a theme as I develop these ones on how do we overcome those obstacles, so hopefully you will get at least my view in a practical way of how to do it. If you look at the promise of simulation training, it's all summarized on this slide. It all started when laparoscopic training centers were created to deal with this new advent of laparoscopy some 20 years ago. There was a heavy investment by industry on these educational sites. There was an acceptance by specialty societies. SAGES is one of them. Then eventually it got to the certifying and accrediting boards when the RRC and eventually the board started saying, as you just saw from Dr. Beisky's presentation, ATLS or FLS is required for certification. Then the American College of Surgeons created a program of accreditation of educational institutes, and then the accredited institutes, some 51 around the world, got together to form a consortium. So this is the big promise. The obstacles, as I see them, are 5. Number 1 is funding. Number 2 is faculty. Number 3 is curricula. Number 4 is attitudes. And number 5 is equipment. And I will give you, in the remainder of my talk, a little brief summary of how I see each one of these obstacles and how I see potentials for overcoming them. Let's talk about funding first. Funding implies capital costs in terms of the construction. Capital costs in terms of acquisition of equipment is real capital now. Some of these equipments can be extremely expensive. And operational costs as you're going to be running the center. And I think that you have to start thinking about that by saying leaders have an opportunity and a lot of discretion on how they tailor the center. So then you start thinking, how do I create a mission and a vision for my center that is compatible with my institution and my resources in a realistic way? As we looked at the finances of all the consortia members in the college, we find that costs vary substantially, and resources do from one to another. Costs are directly related to what the simulation center does, and so the general advice that I have with that is plan realistically for that. This is a study published a couple of years ago that looked at one potential solution, as I entitled the slide, and that is maximize cost effectiveness. All the things that you see in there are essentially relatively cheap things to do, and they were able to set up some form of simulation for about $1,000 per resident for the program. And while that is not necessarily that cheap, there were a lot of things that these people were learning for that amount of money. A more comprehensive solution is one that I think applies to everyone and that I tried to put together on this slide for you, is to identify the stakeholders so that then the funding of the center can be done based on some logical strategy. And essentially the question to ask is who is going to benefit from the center? In our case, at the University of Washington, certainly the school, because we created an umbrella organization. Richard Satawa created this big group of all the people that were interested in that. The departments, because it's part of our mission. The hospital, because we clearly involve quality improvement and work directly with them to set up simulation, teaching, and assessment that will improve the quality of care in the hospital. The insurance industry, both the health insurance industry because of the decrease in complications and the malpractice side, as was recently pointed out by Dr. Jones, and the public in general. And for that, we have AHRQ and a number of other organizations where we can get funding for that. So look at, is the mission of this particular center supported by the views of stakeholders? In our case, you can see the capital costs were paid by both hospitals. Costs of equipment in terms of capital were paid by industry, and those were my disclosures earlier, or by grants, in part by the department of the school. And operational costs are completely absorbed, in our case, by the departments and the school, so the system is the one that puts up the price of education. We currently spend for operations about $1 million a year. Half of this budget is covered by grants because we do a fair amount of research in the lab there, and half, which is essentially associated with the task of teaching, is paid by the school. On the understanding that a deficit will always be generated and it should primarily be covered by the school. This is our situation, but I think if you go back to the previous slide on identifying the stakeholders, you can look at that. There's another issue about funding, and that is the continuous movement and conflict of interest. We created a foundation that accepts capital from industry if we can get any kinds of donations, but more often we get grants for specific purposes. So we're working for industry. We are offering training as a potential source of revenue in these cases. We do that at fair market value, and we're carefully supervised by the department and the school with a series of mechanisms so that we are sure that this is fair market value and is totally detached from purchasing and other issues. This is a paper that shows in general how funding is obtained in all institutes, and you can see that it's grants, it's hospitals, it's medical school, pretty much what I showed you from our own institution. So finally, overcoming the funding obstacle, I say develop a good mission statement. Spend some time on this one to decide who the constituencies are and who should be paying for it. Assure institution buy-in before you start. Identify the correct stakeholders, and the resources must be tied to the mission. This actually is a paper that Helen McGrath from Toronto wrote, and that gives a lot of interesting insights into that. Second issue, faculty. There's an experience that we have seen that there's an initial enthusiasm to join the Simulation Institute, then there is a boring that occurs over the first year or two by young faculty that are asked to pretty much repeat tasks all along, and then competing priorities arise, and it's a rapid turnover. So we have to develop strategies. This is a big obstacle, and one potential solution is outlined in these 5 points here. One is to figure ways to not only recruit but to retain this faculty. We do that by creating a special governance that is widespread and that allows most of our faculty to have a clear participation in the leadership of the Institute. We have a specific program on faculty development that aims at keeping this faculty in there. And we have a contract with the Appointment and Promotions Committee of the school that we, as an institute, can provide them with very hard data on faculty performance in the school's primary mission, which is teaching. And therefore, we are not assuring, but we are really somewhere on the way in terms of promotion. The second question is, well, do you really need faculty, and how much faculty you need? And I show you these 2 slides from a paper that you may have seen that was published by one of our residents, Aaron Jensen, that essentially compare 2 groups of people using the OSATs in different types of procedures, and show that whether you did self-directed or expert-directed, that is, whether you use faculty or not, the difference was very minimal, as you can see there in bowel anastomosis in this case, and on the skin closure on the other one. Bottom line being perhaps it's time for us to rethink the situation and ask ourselves if we need to deploy faculty in the more traditional way, or if we can get away with a technician or a lower paid employee. More of these tasks can be, may require faculty. If they do, the more complex tasks do, then look at pools of faculty that either are retired or emeritus, or have some other forms that would be cheaper and easier to implement. With regards to curricula, I think the message here is it is an obstacle because it is not something that many centers really pay attention to. The attention is focused on the equipment, and the attention is not focused on the curriculum. And Karim today gave you an absolutely top standing talk on effectiveness of teaching and in developing the right methods. I think curricula should be driving this whole thing. We have, as was just pointed out by a previous speaker, the ACSIAPDS curriculum that is at the moment being put together. So this is a little bit in the next 12 to 18 months so that we will have some form of a curriculum. But it's important to define personnel, etc., and to do the things that are on this slide, again, in a local way, saying these are the resources that we have and these are the needs that we have. Measure the results of the intervention caused by the curriculum and change the curriculum in response to that and create that vicious cycle that has the curriculum as the top priority of the center and then everything else flowing from that. In other words, you don't acquire a piece of equipment because somebody gives it to you or because somebody, or because there's some enthusiasm, but only when it is needed to drive a certain part from the curriculum. This requires special expertise to develop this curriculum, and I think that educators now are a new breed of individuals that have come into surgery departments as key individuals in the surgery department. This one is a bit of an unknown, or was a bit of an unknown until we started doing the skills training, and then we learned that there are certain negative attitudes among the faculty and certain negative attitudes among the residents. The most common one on the faculty is that they are telling a resident who spent a significant amount of time learning how to tie a knot, and that's exactly the procedure that was taught in the simulation center. Where did you learn that? Why are you doing that? And who told you that? Oh, come on, I don't use this, I don't use that. And it becomes very personal. This is an antiquated thing. But it does exist, and I think this puts a significant damper in the ability of the center to implement the teaching. Why? Because the residents are very smart, and they say, well, if I am not going to be, if this doesn't make any sense, why should I do it? Among the residents is because patient care is a priority, and it truly is a priority, so they tend to leave their own training in the institute to times that they can afford. Simulation lab is not as important as the patients. And of course, faculty tells me that they do it differently, so why spend some time there? The solution for the attitudes, I think, is time. We older faculty, some of us that may not have believed in the power of simulation, are slowly going away. Incidentally, I love that sentence that Karim said. Simulation is not here the center of it. Simulation is just a tool, right, for the process of teaching. But I think that as we provide evidence that simulation is transferable, as was shown earlier by our chair and by Dr. Grantroff, is transferable and is measurable in benefits to the patients, I think that the attitudes will change. Demonstration of transfer of skill, and I call it the anesthesia equivalent because in our institution, the anesthesiologist started this many, many years ago. No one believed that this was going to make any change. Putting a tube where in the trachea of a piece of plastic, etc., you can imagine all of that. And with the passage of years, today, no anesthesiologist in our institution, none of the attendings would accept working with a newcomer that has not spent 2 weeks in the simulation center under all kinds of scenarios. And that has become just a practice. And as young faculty come out of the residency, join faculty, and they were trained with simulation, they will use simulation more. So I think this is just a matter of time. And lastly, equipment. And in equipment, as was also mentioned today, I think there is a semi-urgent need to develop more sophisticated equipment that brings even more realism to the simulation. Just like you saw on that piece of news from Boston, when they were showing this hemorrhage, it is important that there is clearly realism in the simulation, and it is also needed some measurement, some evaluation. Dr. Baisky was saying we don't have something that can be reproducible, that we have all accepted is important. Certainly the science of team training has advanced beyond that, and we know what is important in team training, and there are actually very good ways to measure performance in teams. So that may be something that the boards may want to look at as well for the future, and to say using team steps or many of the other ways to measure how is the team performing in that operating room, and give us a number for that. The cost of such venture are substantial in terms of development and in terms of also of maintenance. So equipment must be driven by curriculum, and this is a repeated theme that you will see me doing. But there are solutions. You know, there's a lot of funding. Look at the numbers that certain organizations have put into it. AHRQ has also put a significant amount in patient care improvement. So I think that there's a good way to look at the future. And there are some now industries that are specifically moving forward with some proposals asking for the opportunity to work with universities and other places to create new equipment. So I believe that there are some solutions with there. So these are the 5 obstacles, Madam Chair, that I thought would be most important to identify, and I have tried to provide you with either my personal or other people's ideas regarding how to deal with them. In closing, if you think that there are too many obstacles and there are too few of us, remember the sentence that Margaret Mead gave: never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. In fact, it is the only thing that ever has. Thank you very much.